Back for Blood is considered by many, including some of their developers, to be the spiritual successor to Left 4 Dead. It was released on October 12th, 2021, and features 4-player teams versus hordes of undead monsters and special mutated enemies known as the Ridden. Now, I was lucky enough to play the game during the closed beta, and I picked up the game at launch. But for whatever reason, after that, I barely played. However, very recently, I picked up Back for Blood again, and I've had a lot to say about it ever since. So in today's video, I'm going to go over my thoughts on Back for Blood after returning to the game.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another Carrot Scraps video, and by another, I mean the 108th. So before we get into my thoughts on Back for Blood, I wanted to mention a couple of things up front. First of all, like I mentioned in the opening of the video, and like I've mentioned in previous videos on my channel, I have actually played Back for Blood before in a closed beta. I just feel like that context is important for someone who played briefly at launch, but then started playing again recently. But I wanted to address one other thing really quickly. And the other thing is, I have a mustache, and I've been trying to get rid of it, but it won't go away. Now, I don't know how to say this. I've never grown a mustache before. None of my other facial hair is grown. It's just the upper lip. Now, as I'm sure you're aware if you've been watching the channel for a while, I work for a company called Juniper Technologies, and they have me test a lot of different stuff, and I'm a little concerned that this might be a side effect of one of the things that they're having me test.
Why is this happening now? It's ruining the summer of carrots.
I don't know. I've tried dealing with this on my own, and I just can't figure out anything. So I'm going to call my job today, so just excuse me if I'm on the phone with them while I'm talking about Back for Blood in this video. Because I'm sick of having this on my face. Nothing I do gets rid of it. What do you mean you can't see it? It's right here. What do you mean you can't see? It's right here. Pay attention. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's start talking more about Back for Blood. Now, before we go over anything, let's get the basics out of the way and describe what exactly Back for Blood is for those of you who aren't aware. The world of Back for Blood gives you a window into the post-apocalypse once a deadly virus changes the living and the dead into mindless creatures known as the Ridden. From my understanding of the lore and the story, the virus comes in the form of this worm known as the Devil Worm, and these worms originate from a meteor that came from space and hit our planet. As I'm sure you can tell, the Ridden are very similar to the more common horror trope of zombies, but I think Back for Blood wanted to put their own spin on this genre, which I totally appreciate. The Ridden rarely travel alone and often swarm the player in great numbers. While the basic Ridden are what you'll typically run into, there are also mutated and special Ridden that make the world of Back for Blood more horrifying, but playing it more interesting. Regular Ridden are typical humanoid-sized enemies, but there are various other species of Ridden that are far different from this, and these range from hulking behemoths that spew bile, spider-like creatures that immobilize the player, or towering threats that will rush towards you the moment they see you. These, plus other Ridden and various other mutations, such as status effects, are just a little of what the game has to offer in terms of enemy variety. The story of Back for Blood is very light, and is mostly driven by the personal perspective of the pulpy, eccentric protagonist that you choose to play as, and players can team up with groups of 4 online to take on the Ridden, or with teams of CPUs instead. Like I mentioned, Back for Blood is the spiritual sequel to Left 4 Dead, and so this game is also a PvE first-person shooter where teams of 4 players online navigate levels completing various tasks, with the ultimate goal being to get from point A to point B, from one safe room to another. Missions are broken up into groups within each act. In the current game, there are 3 acts with multiple missions within, and a 4th act with only one final boss mission. And that's the general idea of Back for Blood. But there's one more thing that I wanted to mention before I get into my thoughts. I'm probably going to mention Left 4 Dead a couple of times in this review, since the game is transparently a spiritual successor to that series. Like I mentioned earlier, even the developers have essentially stated as much. The similarities are clear, and I believe them to be intentional, so I don't think it's a bad thing to compare the two. That being said, mentioning Left 4 Dead is not going to be the focus of my review, and I won't be obsessing over the details that make these two titles similar or different, so just keep that in mind while you watch. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into my thoughts about Back for Blood. Hello, hi, this is Carrot Boy. Please don't put me on hold, please don't. I need help. There's something on my face and I hate it. They've been putting me on hold like crazy. I've been calling them every single day. Sometimes they'll just straight up hang up. Like I'll call them and they'll be like, oh, hi, we're going to put you on hold really quickly. And I'll say, thank you. And I'll hear them like stumble over themselves and then hang up the phone. I'm getting very sick of this. I want the mustache to go away, please. When it comes to weapons in Back 4 Blood, I think that the game features a pretty well-rounded arsenal. There doesn't seem to be anything egregious missing from these weapons, and the ones that they did choose to feature not only look good and feel good, but I enjoy using them. Back 4 Blood players are given a large selection of primary weapons to choose from, and then a separate pool of secondary weapons to choose from as well, leaving you with 2 weapons, a support item, a health item, and then a slot for projectile-style weapons like Molotovs and grenades. Weapons are also split into color rarities similar to a lot of other games these days. So for example, a green shotgun is going to be better than a gray SMG, and a purple sniper rifle will be better than a blue handgun. In addition, players are able to pick up multiple adjustments for these weapons, and these options also have their own color rarity to them. Stuff like adding new scopes, silencers, or other items to your gun. Now, like I said, I think that Back 4 Blood has a very well-rounded arsenal of weapons. But that being said, there isn't necessarily anything that stands out amongst these weapons either. For example, like the gravity gun from Half-Life, the portal gun from Portal, the saw blade gun from Far Cry New Dawn, or even the junk gun from Fallout 3. Those are all iconic weapons that you could really only get from those games when they first came out, and there's not really a standout weapon like that in Back 4 Blood. Not that that's a necessity, but it's just something that I noticed. All of the weapons in the game are somewhat expected from my experience. There were no surprises, but there also weren't any glaring omissions. And like I said, these guns are really well depicted, and they feel really great to use. Now, before I continue talking about the weapons more generally, I wanted to talk about a more specific experience that I had with Back 4 Blood. So I played the majority of my gameplay for Back 4 Blood on the PlayStation 5. And one of the main features of the PlayStation 5 and its new controller is that you're able to use haptic feedback, which essentially allows for 3D touch and gives you a little bit of force, which makes it feel like you're pulling a real trigger when you pull the trigger of the controller. More and more games released in this new generation of video games have this as an option. And typically, when I play a new video game on my PlayStation 5, I try to use this option if I can, while avoiding the haptic feedback features for games that I've already been playing on other consoles like Fortnite, Doom Eternal, or Avengers. Learning to use the haptic feedback on a game that I've already played is a little difficult for me, so when I start a new game, I want to use the haptic feedback immediately, and make it part of the experience if they provide it. And I gotta say, the haptic feedback on Back 4 Blood is one of the best that I've felt in the game. It really does add to the experience for me, and is immersive in a way that I really didn't expect. It genuinely feels like I'm pulling the trigger of a gun, and it brings me into the world more than I thought it would. Each gun has its own feeling, and with that specific feeling, you know which gun you're holding without even seeing it. I know not all players who will experience Back 4 Blood will have this option, but I have to say it's one of my favorite things about the game, and it really adds another layer of enjoyment to the game for me. The only criticism I have about the haptic feedback has less to do with Back 4 Blood and probably more to do with the hardware itself. It's just sometimes the haptic feedback doesn't feel as strong or the same as it did in previous sittings. For example, when I first played Back 4 Blood, it was on a friend's PS5, and then when I took it home and played it on my own console, I felt like the sensitivity was way less strong. And this doesn't happen frequently, but every now and again, I'll feel a shift in that sensitivity. Full disclosure, I actually had to get a replacement controller for my PlayStation 5 because of a malfunction with the PlayStation 5 controllers that relates to the haptic feedback. And so I'm left wondering if this has to do with the game, or more likely if it has to do with the controller itself. I'm also left wondering if this is in my head, because every now and again, the haptic feedback feels dramatically weaker than it normally does. But either way, it's working perfectly fine most of the time, and it adds so much to the game for me. And I highly recommend it if you haven't tried it out for yourself yet. I'd say that Back 4 Blood and Far Cry 6 are my 2 favorite games on the PlayStation 5 that utilize the haptic feedback. Anyway, let's move on to a detail about the Back 4 Blood weapons that affects all players: weapon customization. Something I really love about Back 4 Blood is weapon customization. When you're playing a mission in Back 4 Blood, you can switch out your weapon at any time. There's nothing forcing you to hold on to a specific weapon if you run into a new one. Oftentimes, when exploring the world, you'll find more powerful weapons or weapons that suit you better. But with that in mind, there are multiple ways to customize your weapons with add-ons that you find in each mission. And beyond it just being cool to make your weapon feel more personalized to you as a player, these add-ons also make the choice to drop a weapon that you've been using somewhat more difficult. And I think that's really interesting. For example, example, sure, you may have found a green assault rifle, but your common shotgun has purple modifications on it. I really like that push and pull that makes customization and which weapons you choose more important. And as a result, I feel like this customization system takes a very simple arsenal of weapons and adds one more layer of complexity that makes the game more interesting. And it's definitely one of my favorite things about the game. Something I don't like about the customization system for weapons is that apparently you can't remove something once you've attached it to your gun, unless you're replacing it with another new part. And I do think that that's a little bit of an odd choice, and I wish that I had more options in that department. But other than that, I love the customization system. Moving on, something interesting that I found about my personal playstyle in Back 4 Blood is that I preferred the automatic weapons over the shotguns. Let me explain. You see, next to the katana, the shotgun is like my favorite weapon in all of video games. And in other games, including the original 2 Left 4 Dead games, I almost always gravitate to using the shotgun in particular. So I found it really odd that in Back 4 Blood, I gravitated to automatic weapons instead. And I found myself wondering why exactly that was. Were automatic weapons and shotguns designed differently? Was it something about the gameplay design? Or was it all just personal preference? For example, it could just be that the horde is way larger in this game and that I feel more comfortable using a weapon with a faster fire rate. But that also might just be my brain coming up with a reason why this is. But it's funny because it's almost disappointing sometimes, because I'll always look at the shotgun and think to myself, I want to play with that, but then I don't pick it up because I'm worried that I'll actually be at a disadvantage if I do, which normally isn't my mindset. What I'm saying is I feel like I'm cheating on the shotgun in this game because of my lack of desire to even use it. And I made sure to try most of the weapons in this game for a longer period of time than I normally did to make sure that I had more experience with the arsenal. And I still found myself preferring automatic weapons as my primary. So is it me or is it the game? I'm honestly not sure, but it's just funny to me and it's something that I've been considering. It is worth mentioning though that recently I have started using the shotgun again, and it's because of a card that allowed me to replace my secondary weapon with a second primary weapon. And it's gotten me to play with the shotgun more, and I think that's really cool, and it just points out how awesome the cards are in this game. Another odd preference that I have in Back 4 Blood that doesn't match up with my previous preferences in games like this is the fact that I don't like using melee weapons in this game, which is especially odd because Holly is my favorite character. Well, she was my favorite character. Now I like Carly way more. Again, looking back at the original Left 4 Dead games, I would use the katana and the firefighter axe pretty regularly. They were an important part of my gameplay and I felt comfortable using them. However, in Back 4 Blood, I find myself avoiding melee weapons altogether and instead using a secondary firearm. I just feel way more comfortable having 2 projectile weapons, especially when I have 2 weapons with different ammo types. Again, I only mention this because typically this isn't how I play games like this, and it makes me wonder what's changed. But I did want to mention one more thing about melee combat in Back 4 Blood that is more so a criticism of games that feature melee combat in general. You see, I think that melee attacks in first-person shooter games need some kind of overhaul. Just swinging a bat or an axe isn't very interesting, and I think making that gameplay more compelling could really add a lot to a game like Back 4 Blood. But again, obviously this isn't just Back 4 Blood that's the problem. I think a lot of first-person shooters that feature melee combat have this same issue, but that doesn't mean that it's not something worth criticizing in Back 4 Blood. I feel like I would enjoy melee combat way more if there was a little more strategy to it. But anyway, in general, the weapons in Back 4 Blood feel fantastic. Even though I have these interesting thoughts about weapons that I don't normally use, the weapons that I do choose to play with are really fun and have a great kick to them. I really love what the incremental adjustments that you can add to your weapons over time adds to the game. It's nice to be able to change important aspects of your gun if you want to. Especially for a game that could potentially get repetitive, those kind of variables are really important. And in general, even though there isn't a standout or memorable collection of weapons, there's no question that the weapons in Back 4 Blood are a classic collection of guns. Now, I mentioned a lot about how I think the guns can be a little bit simple in this game, but let's get to the real complexity of Back 4 Blood, the card system. They have me on hold like again, and it's really frustrating. Hello, this is Carrot Boy 3000. I have a mustache problem that I want to talk to you about. They hung up. Maybe I should stop wording it as like a mustache problem. It sounds like I'm a strange facial hair telemarketer. I'm going to change my approach. That's what I'm going to do. One of the more obvious aspects of Back 4 Blood that distinguishes it from Left 4 Dead is the inclusion of the card system. Each player has their own deck full of assorted cards, and these cards can assist in helping you create a build for your character or altering the game in various other ways. You can adjust how much ammo or copper that you find in the world, you can alter your defensive stats or how much health you gain back when you use an item, and you can even change fundamental details like whether or not friendly fire is working. So there are a lot of options for a player to change the way the game works with these cards. Now, as somebody who loves trading cards in real life, I'm a huge fan of card mechanics in video games. And in Back 4 Blood, I really like the idea of presenting this kind of information in card format. For me personally, it helps me understand these kinds of mechanics better, and it helps me make builds more easily. I feel like it's no secret that this is a part of video games that I'm not the most fluent in, but since returning to the game, this card system has really encouraged me to get into this aspect of it. Sometimes because I want to overcome a challenge, or sometimes because I'm just experimenting with something new. One example is when I was having trouble on the second difficulty in the game, when concluding the final mission in Act 3. I really felt like the challenge was unfair, and I got pretty frustrated when I died. But I decided to take a step back and put on my thinking cap for a second, and use the tools that the game was giving me to overcome this challenge. Even though I hadn't really considered the cards up until that point, I thought it was a good idea to take them more seriously. And I thought about my shortcomings in that mission where I had game overed. And what do you know, when I finally got to that mission again, it was way easier for me to take on than it was the first time. And that feeling was super rewarding. It not only encouraged me to interact with this part of the game, but it also made me feel like a genius and really powerful for what I had made. So since then, I've been using these cards regularly, and they're an important part of my gameplay. Although to be fair, I have found a sharp difficulty increase when playing with the higher difficulties such as Nightmare. And while the higher difficulties can be a little frustrating for me and I haven't been able to crack that puzzle just yet, I'm still hopeful that the tools to overcome those challenges can be found in the cards, because of what I learned when I first started using them. And I'm really happy that they're part of Back 4 Blood, first of all because I enjoy them, but second of all because they really differentiate the game from its predecessor. So if you were hesitating getting into the cards in Back 4 Blood, I highly encourage you to check them out. In addition to your personal deck, there are also corruption cards in the game, and these cards are just a visual representation for the kinds of enemies and shortcomings that you'll face in a particular mission. It's like making the challenges of any other game visible to the player. So in a Mario game, when you visit a level and there are fire enemies, instead of just presenting those enemies, imagine if corruption cards appeared that said, "Warning Mario, there are going to be fire enemies in this level." That's basically what the corruption cards do in Back 4 Blood. And they're a little blunt, but again, I think it's a really nice way to present the information. I kind of like knowing what I'm getting in for when I start a mission. It's also a great way to randomize the threats that you experience in every mission, which is again one of many ways that the game is making sure that there's replay value when you replay the same campaign, because every time you play, you'll have a new assortment of challenges in the form of these corruption cards. It not only makes me more aware, but it also intimidates me sometimes. You know, I feel myself start to sweat when I realize there are some really rough customers in this next mission. So yeah, in general, I really like the cards in Back 4 Blood. Listen here. Listen here. Before you speak, do not hang up on me. You will not hang up on me. You do not hang up on me. I need to talk about my facial hair. Pick up the phone. I'm going to change my approach again. I'm going to choose a second new strategy. That one didn't, that worked less than the previous ones. Now, when it comes to my thoughts on the campaign and the missions in the game, I really enjoy them. I like the simple story, I like the context of the world and the desperation to save Fort Hope, and I enjoy the straightforward missions of going from one safe room to another, with the occasional different objectives to spice things up. In general, for the most part, I feel like the more simple the better when it comes to missions in Back 4 Blood, but getting other objectives occasionally is a really good combo breaker. For example, I like the missions where paths need to be cleared by destroying several glowing vines. I like the missions where objects or research needs to be secured, and most of those missions are good every now and again. I will say though that I do have a problem with some of the level design in the game. In a handful of missions, players are asked to backtrack from one area to a previously visited one, and for me that isn't always the most fun, and it feels like it's somewhat counterintuitive to the main philosophy of the game. When I was first playing the game at launch, I found myself genuinely lost on 2 levels because I didn't know that I had to go backward. I didn't realize that in some cases bonuses when I completed an objective, it changed a previously visited area that I could now traverse. Now, I'm not saying that this can't be done in Back 4 Blood, but maybe making it more clear and natural might be a good idea in future missions. In addition, while I think searching for an item can be a great mission objective, there are also other times where the game world does not accommodate this style of gameplay. For example, there's a mission where you have to find a replacement battery in a series of cabins. Now, I've replayed this mission and the campaign multiple times at this point. However, this section always gives me trouble, to the point where I'm not looking forward to playing it anymore. I think it's because the item that I need to acquire kind of blends into the environment in this level, so even when I do find it, I don't notice that I have until the game lets me know when I'm taking too long. This really slows down the game for me, and it's one of my least favorite parts of the campaign. But I do appreciate that the game is considerate enough to help the player out if they feel like you're taking too long. Now, with all of that being said, I still love the campaign and the missions in the game. Especially in the last couple of weeks, I've had so much fun just replaying these missions over and over. I really do think that the campaign is a lot of fun, and I enjoy revisiting it on different difficulties, and approaching these simple scenarios with a new deck of cards or a new strategy. Now let's talk a little bit about the world of Back 4 Blood, both its visual design but also my feelings about the lore of the game. If you watched my Evil Dead review, then you know that I absolutely love the forest. Something I really love about Back 4 Blood is how often it throws its players into the wilderness, and I really like their version of the great outdoors. Now, there are still plenty of interesting locations that involve more urban territories. One of my favorites was navigating an empty school, but the game also does a good job of taking you to locations that can only exist in the world of Back 4 Blood. For example, towards the end of the campaign, there's this reveal moment about burying bodies underground, and so you have to navigate this large area that's essentially a landfill for human bodies, and it's just so gross and morbid and otherworldly, and I really appreciate that visual aesthetic. It's another one of the things that I love about the lore of Back 4 Blood, because the Ridden can present a threat that can be seen in the world, even if there's nothing living around. This strange parasite grows all over the world of Back 4 Blood, and I really appreciate that choice in the visual aesthetic, especially when comparing Back 4 Blood to Left 4 Dead. It's something that really stands out. I don't just feel like I'm playing a zombie game, I feel like I'm teleported to a completely new horror location, even when I'm visiting familiar places. And seeing these familiar places taken over by these bizarre tendrils really illustrates the point that humanity is on the edge. It actually reminds me a lot of one of my favorite science fiction stories, War of the Worlds. And one of my favorite things about that story growing up wasn't just that aliens invaded, but that the world was drastically changing as well, very similar to the way the world does in Back 4 Blood. Traversing farms, going underground, traveling through the cities, there's a lot of different places to see in Back 4 Blood, and I think they're all rendered pretty well. And I hope that in the future we get even more interesting locations. Hopefully locations that I'm less familiar with in my real life. So I would absolutely love it if future DLCs took us to ocean locations. For example, like an oil rig in the middle of the ocean. Or we could go really interesting and take a tour of a fictional underwater facility. But my point is, there are a lot of other locations that we could see, and I hope we see them in the future. Something else I really love about the environments of Back 4 Blood is the careful eye to detail to create visual stories. Level designers will place a shotgun next to a corpse with a lantern, and it gives the player this little window into the world before you arrived. These kind of details remind me of environmental storytelling in a game like Fallout. Now, maybe it's done better in other video games than Back 4 Blood, but I love its presence in this game. Something I don't like about the environments in Back 4 Blood is how gray and muddy things tend to get. This goes back to a point that I made earlier about important things getting lost in the background. I think a lot of that has to do with the design and the color palette, which is weird because I think the game does have moments where it uses more saturated colors well. For example, like weak points on the Ridden or weak points in the environment. Seeing these bulbous glowing red or yellow pimples really draws your eye to them, but I think those design elements could have been stretched out to the rest of the world. I would have liked to have seen more life in the living death that is the Ridden. These disgusting tendrils that are attaching themselves to everything in our world. If you know me, you know I love saturated colors in general, and while I do love the environments of Back 4 Blood, I just get disappointed sometimes when I look out into the world and it's just gray vistas. Or at least that's what it is the majority of the time to me. One other thing I wanted to bring up that is tangentially related to the environments is the fact that the flashlight in Back 4 Blood is automatic and out of the player's control, so the player cannot turn the flashlight on or off. I think this is a really odd decision, and while it's not a deal breaker for the game, it's a decision I really disagree with. In general, regardless of visibility, I would rather have the control of turning on the flashlight. Having the flashlight automatically turn on or off just feels a little strange. It kind of takes me out of the moment, honestly. But in addition, there are a lot of dark moments in the game where I wish I could turn the flashlight on so I can see what's going on. And because the flashlight is automatic, I'm out of luck on that front. So it's a minor criticism, but I do wish that I had the ability to turn the flashlight on and off. But again, in general, I really love the world of Back 4 Blood. Even with my criticisms, it's honestly one of my favorite things about the game. And oftentimes, thinking about the way the world looks makes me want to return to the game. So I think they did a really great job. Hello? Please don't hang up, please, and don't put me on hold. I need to talk to you. I'm an employee. I'm an employee for the company. I'm a little more than frustrated, but I guess it's really getting in the way of my life. I'm very frustrated about it. It's very scary and frightening and scary. Okay, well, I think you're under-exaggerating. Now let's talk about the written. Now I have something to admit first and foremost that I doubt will ruffle too many feathers, but basically, I'm not the biggest fan of zombies. They're just a little too mindless for my taste. For example, I really like Deadites from Evil Dead because they present a similar threat to zombies, but they have a really fun personality. They not only want to kill you, but they say really messed up stuff. They're mindless, but they do have a twisted motivation. Now, it's not like I hate zombies or anything. I just don't feel like I gravitate to them very often, or at least as much as I did when I was younger. It just feels like zombies are a little too dull for me at this point in my life. That being said, I think zombies work really well in video games. In horror games, you don't always need your enemy to be super compelling. Sometimes you just need a mindless killing machine on the other side of your weapon. As a result, I often find that zombies are best presented in video games. That being said, Back 4 Blood decided to establish their zombies a little differently than the genre typically does. The Ridden are obviously very similar to zombies in various ways, except they are a mutated parasite from outer space that is continuing to mutate further. Now up front, I have to admit I'm a little disappointed that the special Ridden enemy types in the game are so similar to the enemy types from the original Left 4 Dead. Obviously this is a spiritual sequel, so it makes sense, but I was disappointed we didn't get to see more variety here. I mean, these enemy types are a part of the game that I feel like they could have gotten really creative with when it comes to innovation, but a lot of them just feel like the greatest hits from Left 4 Dead. That being said, Back 4 Blood does do something to make their enemies stand out, and that's the various amounts of mutations that you can see on the Ridden depending on the level that you're playing, and the corruption cards that you're dealt. With the card system in the game, oftentimes you encounter Ridden that are mutated in a strange new direction. I really liked this form of variety in terms of anatomy for the Ridden. It visually made the enemies more interesting to fight, in addition to encouraging the players to interact with the Ridden differently. Those little changes to the Ridden each round make what could be seen as repetitive missions more interesting every time you play them. Now, while there are a number of special Ridden that are very similar to the enemies that you saw in Left 4 Dead, there are still completely new enemy types featured in this game, such as boss fights like the Ogre and the Breaker. The Ogre is one of the largest enemies in Back 4 Blood, and definitely the largest that we've seen since Left 4 Dead. It is an absolutely massive monster that players need to coordinate carefully on to take down. Something really interesting about it is that you can get its health down to half, and then it'll retreat only to show up later in the level, which is a really fun dynamic about this enemy. Now at first, I wasn't super impressed by the Ogre, but at this point in my gameplay, I'm excited to see this enemy because I have my own strategies on how to take it down. Either that, or I have my own strategy on how to escape. The Breaker isn't as interesting of an enemy, but it's still nice to have another boss enemy that applies pressure to the players, especially one that isn't as difficult as the Ogre in my opinion, but it's still more difficult than the regular special Ridden. Although I will say some of the new special Ridden I'm not as interested in. For example, like the Hag. Even though I really like the idea of this boss Ridden who will come and snatch up one of the players, I don't feel like I've enjoyed the Hag's presence whenever they show up in a mission. And part of the reason for that for me is it feels like there isn't a great way to combat it. I mean, it's really focused on just capturing one of the members of your team, which in many ways is great. I like that it forces you to stay together. I think any kind of gameplay mechanic that does that for a multiplayer game is really smart. But that being said, I just feel like we don't have a lot of options when it comes to combating the Hag. So maybe I need to get better at combating this enemy when it shows up, but for now, I just haven't had a lot of fun with this new special Ridden. But the majority of the special Ridden are really fun to interact with. Even with their increased its difficulty, there are many ways for you to overcome that challenge. One of those ways is the addition of the weak point system. The weak point system is a very upfront and straightforward way to deal with the ridden, and I think it was a really good idea to add to enemies in the game. These special ridden can feel really overwhelming sometimes, but to have a bright target on that enemy that can really draw your focus not only reassures you that you're able to take on these enemies, but it helps you deal with them more easily. So in general, while there wasn't a ton of variety when it came to the enemies in this game compared to its predecessors, I still really enjoyed the threat that they presented, and I liked their visual design and lore, as well as their gameplay implementations. The last thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to Back 4 Blood before I go for today is the characters of the game. I saw a lot of people saying that the characters were too shallow in Back 4 Blood, and that they were nothing compared to the characters from the original Left 4 Dead games. Now, I don't agree with this sentiment for a couple of reasons. I thought the characters were fine in Back 4 Blood. They're fun, pulpy, standout character archetypes. But in addition, I also don't think that the original Left 4 Dead games featured particularly complex characters either. They weren't bad characters in the original games, I just didn't think that they were particularly deep enough to criticize these new characters because of. I'd say that these characters are similarly on the same level. Neither group is incredible, but I wouldn't necessarily hop on my soapbox to praise or condemn either of them. What I will say about Back 4 Blood is that while I do enjoy the characters, I do think that they could have done more with the voice lines. I really enjoyed hearing the story of these characters when they would talk about themselves, but strangely, I would hear the same stories over and over, and it got old really quickly. I was really surprised at how many times I heard the same backstory from certain characters, so I do wish that the game took more opportunities to express these characters' stories through their voice lines. Also, while I do like the characters in Back 4 Blood, I will criticize their writing. A lot of the one-liners in Back 4 Blood really make me cringe, or they just make me feel like the game is trying a little bit too hard. Talking about food, trying to act nonchalant about the apocalypse, that stuff can be cool when done well, but there are a lot of lines that genuinely make me facepalm. So maybe from that perspective, the characters from the original Left 4 Dead games are better, but I wouldn't say that that's a character problem, more so just a writing problem, because I don't remember myself cringing at these kind of one-liners when I was playing the original two games. But again, I really like the characters from Back 4 Blood. Having characters like conspiracy theorists and ex-military is really cool, but I also really like the visual design of all of these characters. While I criticized the world for not popping enough, I do think that these characters really pop off the screen, which is something that I appreciate a lot, and it's something that makes the cast more memorable to me. But one of the best things about the characters in the game are their abilities, which adds an extra element of strategy when choosing the person you want to play as. And I gotta say, there's a great assortment of abilities when it comes to this roster, because it really has me torn on picking a character that I want to play as because I just like them, versus choosing a character that has an ability that I prefer, and I like that a lot. The characters are a big part of the original Left 4 Dead games, and I think that Back 4 Blood has carried on that tradition well by introducing a new cast of colorful characters. Okay. No, yeah, I understand. Again, I just wish y'all told me that this would happen. But yeah, I'm totally fine, you know, with shifting responsibilities if that's something that you feel that I'm ready for or that you'd like me to do. Yeah, for sure. All right, thank you so much. And I'm sorry for raising my voice. Yeah, that wasn't intended. I'll try to. Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you so much. Bye. All right, so finally got in contact with my job. They told me that this is temporary, but that I cannot get rid of it myself. They say it's a moon phase thing, essentially because of some experimental thing that they're trying with me. Depending on the phase of the moon, I will gain a mustache that cannot be eradicated with traditional means. So, I mean, as long as they explained that, I guess that's fine for me. But I'm excited about the future of the job because apparently I'm going to start working on some new stuff soon. So that's exciting. I hate my mustache so much. All right, anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. If for some reason you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. As regular viewers know, I make a variety of content on my channel, and I'm always gonna make the videos that I wanna make. But if you see something you enjoy, make sure to let me know, and I'll try to prioritize that kind of content in the future. Why do I do this with my hands? Is this related to the mustache? No, I'm pretty sure I do that like every single video for some reason. If you want to watch me play video games like Back 4 Blood and Marvel's Avengers Live, check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/carrotscraps, and all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are at carrotscraps as well. So I want to thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Something really funny about me buying Back for Blood when it first came out, and something that actually led to me picking it up in the first place, was the fact that the version that I found was this kind of special edition version in giant air quotes. And what it comes with is a deck of Back for Blood playing cards. I've never seen this before. This is super bizarre. I just realized why this... It's because there are cards in the game. That's why this comes with cards. Oh my gosh, I've had this for almost an entire year, and I've thought this is the silliest thing ever because there was no correlation between like a first-person shooter and a deck of 52 playing cards. And just now I realized it makes a lot of sense, or it makes more... a lot is a strong word, but this makes more sense than I was giving it credit for. Oh my gosh, I am the fool. This is insane. Well, it's still one of the more odd box sets I've ever gotten for a game. A deck of playing cards with my first-person shooter. How wonderful.